Ever get the feeling that...
The real story is happening in the shadows.
Yeah.
That's where we're headed today.
Yeah.
Into the shadowy world of UK boxing.
Right.
And, I mean, way beyond the glitz and glamour of...
Those big title fights.
Right.
We're talking underground rings.
Whispers of fight fixing.
Mm-hmm.
And two brothers who climb to the top by playing a very different game.
Oh, okay.
Our guide to this world.
A single article.
Dean and Dillian Whyte, kings of the UK boxing underworld.
Okay.
Now that title alone is a knockout punch.
Are they ruthless kingpins or just victims of a good old-fashioned boxing hype machine? That's our mission today.
To separate the fact from the fiction.
Okay.
And see what we can learn about power, ambition.
And maybe even the dark side of the sweet science.
Right.
Right off the bat, the article throws us into a scene straight out of a Guy Ritchie film.
Yep.
Dillian Whyte, already making waves as a fighter.
Gets blatantly ripped off by a promoter with the oh-so-subtle name of Johnny Slick.
And, that kind of thing, unfortunately, isn't all that uncommon.
In the unregulated world of underground fighting,
Yeah.
it's a world where contracts are fluid.
Loyalties are tested.
And reputations are everything.
It makes you wonder, do the real sharks wear suits or boxing gloves in this world?
It's often hard to tell. But in this case...
The article takes us to a dingy pub.
Tensions running high.
Where the Whyte brothers finally confront Johnny Slick. Dillian, known for his explosive power in the ring.
Lets his fist do the talking.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing.
The article really emphasizes Dean's demeanor throughout this whole encounter.
Okay.
He's described as eerily calm.
Collected, almost chilling.
As he delivers this line to Johnny Slick. You made a mistake, Johnny.
You don't steal from family.
Whoa, okay.
That sends chills down my spine just hearing you say that.
It's like something straight out of a mob movie.
Right.
It's not just a threat. It feels like a statement.
Exactly. And it's incredibly clever.
By invoking family,
the Whytes are drawing a very clear line.
This isn't just business. This is personal.
It's about respect.
Loyalty.
And the consequences of violating those codes.
Right.
The violence Dillian unleashes is almost secondary to the message Dean sends.
A message that reverberates through their whole world.
So it's about establishing dominance?
Making it clear they're not to be messed with. But it sounds like this is just the opening act.
The article makes it clear that this beatdown in the pub was just the beginning.
Of the Whyte brothers' rise to power.
Right.
They weren't content with just evening the score.
They were ready to completely rewrite the rules of the game.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Instead of just taking their money back.
The Whyte brothers essentially absorb Johnny Slick's entire operation.
Oh, wow.
They go from collecting debts to running their own underground fights.
Building a network that stretches across the UK.
Okay, so they're like entrepreneurs.
But in a very specific...
Very intense line of work.
Yeah.
Paint us a picture here.
What did these underground fights look like?
What was at stake?
Imagine this.
Grimy warehouses.
The air thick with smoke and anticipation.
Shadowy figures placing bets in hushed tones.
The article talks about this electric atmosphere.
The kind you only get when the outcome of a fight is completely unpredictable.
Right.
Where every punch carries real weight.
Because remember...
These weren't sanctioned matches with referees ready to jump in at the first sign of trouble.
We're talking bare knuckle.
No holds barred brawl.
That's a whole different level of intensity than what we see on TV.
These guys were tapping into something primal.
Something visceral.
Absolutely.
And that's how they start to cement their power.
It wasn't just about making money off these fights.
It was about controlling the pipeline.
The very source of talent in the boxing world.
Okay.
The article highlights how they start to recruit young, hungry fighters.
Kids with raw talent and a burning desire to prove themselves.
Okay, but at first glance, that sounds like what any manager or promoter does.
What makes the Whyte brothers different?
You see, in the legitimate boxing world, you sign contracts,
Right.
You have lawyers, there's at least a veneer of rules and regulations.
Right.
But in the Whyte's world, the article suggests those rules didn't apply.
Oh, wow.
They were creating a new system.
One built on loyalty, enforced by something far more powerful than any contract.
Okay. Fear.
And who better to cultivate that aura of fear than...
Dillian, the body snatcher, Whyte.
Right.
I mean, the nickname alone is enough to make you think twice about crossing these guys.
Exactly.
His reputation became their most effective weapon.
Wow.
The article even suggests that often his mere presence was enough to maintain order.
It's classic power dynamics.
Yeah.
You don't need to constantly resort to force.
When you've successfully cultivated an image of danger,
Right.
The thread itself becomes a tool.
So they're not just managing fighters.
They're building an empire.
But empires need territory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like the Whytes weren't afraid to expand theirs.
You're catching on. It wasn't just the fighters they were bringing under their control.
The article talks about how even established figures in the boxing world, promoters, gym owners,
had to start playing by the Whytes' rules if they wanted to stay in business. They were essentially creating a monopoly.
becoming synonymous with UK boxing itself.
Wow, that's a bold move.
You'd think someone would try to stand up to them.
Someone who remembers how things used to be.
And that's where Big Al McGowan, enters the picture.
He's this veteran boxing promoter, a symbol of the old guard.
Who becomes the face of resistance against the Whytes' growing influence.
Oh, this sounds like it's about to get good.
I bet Big Al had a few tricks up his sleeve.
What makes this clash so interesting?
Is that even the article hints at Big Al's past? Suggesting that he wasn't exactly a saint himself. He likely operated in that same morally gray area.
Bending rules and cutting corners to get ahead.
So it's not a clear-cut case of good versus evil.
It's more like two different shades of gray colliding. And that complexity is what makes this whole story so compelling. You have Big Al,
who probably represents a system that was already flawed,
suddenly embodying this almost nostalgic idea of resistance against the new,
even more ruthless order the Whytes are establishing.
I can only imagine that confrontation didn't exactly end with a handshake and a smile.
You're right about that.
The article describes this brutal encounter
where Dillian confronts Big Al on his own turf.
Oh, wow.
His own gym.
It's not just a fight, it's a statement.
Dillian dismantles Big Al, both physically and symbolically,
sending a clear message.
This is the new world order.
And resistance is futile.
That's a powerful image.
But at this point, the Whytes have conquered the underground scene.
Where do they go from there?
What's left to conquer?
That's when Dean,
the strategic mind behind the operation, sets his sights on a much bigger prize.
The world of legitimate professional boxing. He hatches a plan to take their brand of,
shall we say, persuasion, and use it to manipulate the sport from the inside out.
Now we're talking serious power plays.
But how do you even begin to control something as massive and seemingly regulated
as professional boxing?
Well, that's where the mafia allegations really start flying.
And things get even more interesting.
Okay, so we're talking about potentially fixing fights, but how does that even work?
It's not like you could just tell a professional boxer to take a dive in the ring, can you?
Right, you're right. It's usually much more subtle than that.
You have to remember that professional boxing is a complex ecosystem. There are judges,
referees, trainers,
even cutmen who can influence the outcome of a fight.
Right.
The article suggests that the Whytes use their connections,
their reputation,
and perhaps even more unsavory methods to exert their influence at every level.
So we're talking about bribing judges,
intimidating referees,
maybe even sabotaging opponents behind the scenes?
The article doesn't get into specifics, but it hints at those possibilities.
Imagine, for instance, a judge who's suddenly inclined to score a close round in favor of a Whyte-connected fighter. Or a referee who's a little quicker to stop a fight when a Whyte fighter is on the ropes.
Right.
These actions might seem subtle on the surface,
but they can drastically alter the outcome of a fight.
And the scariest part,
unless there's overwhelming evidence,
it's nearly impossible to prove intent.
Right.
It all just becomes part of the murky underbelly of the sport.
Exactly.
And that's where the real damage is done.
Because if people lose faith in the integrity of the sport,
if they believe that fights are rigged,
right,
then what are we even watching?
It cheapens the whole thing.
Discredits the hard work and dedication of every single boxer who steps into the ring.
It feels like a betrayal.
Not just of the sport,
but of the fans who invest their time,
their money,
and their emotions in these fighters.
And you have to wonder,
what happens to the fighters who are caught in the middle of all this?
Yeah.
Are they willing participants?
Or are they being exploited as pawns in a much bigger game?
That's a really good question.
The article paints the Whytes as almost mythical figures.
These untouchable kingpins.
Right.
But it doesn't really delve into the human cost of their ambition.
And that's where we have to be careful.
About taking any single narrative at face value. The truth, as they say,
is often much more nuanced.
Right.
While the Whytes undoubtedly wielded significant influence,
it's likely their power stemmed from a combination of factors.
Dillian's talent,
Dean's business acumen,
and yes, their ruthlessness.
So it's not a black and white situation.
It's a whole lot of gray.
Exactly.
And that leads us to the ultimate question.
Can a system built on intimidation and potentially illegal activities really last?
Right.
Or is it all destined to crumble under its own weight?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It makes you think.
What will the Whyte brothers' legacy be?
Will they be remembered as brilliant businessmen who conquered the boxing world, or as something far more sinister?
And what does their story tell us about the price of unchecked ambition?
Not just in boxing,
right,
but in any field where power and influence are up for grabs.
That's something for you to ponder.
Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.
And remember,
sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones lurking just beneath the surface.